An Amish man fell for a fat virgin he can't touch, and what happened next shocked everyone. Out on the Kansas plains, a storm howls across the frozen fields. When a quiet carpenter drags a half-frozen woman from the snow and saves her life. He gives her shelter, but not his touch. He's sworn never to lay a hand on another woman again. By morning, the gossip spreads like wildfire. The town preacher demands he marry her or send her away. So he does the unthinkable. He marries her under a vow of no touch at all. But mercy doesn't stay quiet for long. When they take in a starving child no one else will claim, the rules of their world begin to break apart. Faith collides with fear. Judgment turns to exile. And when death comes knocking in a winter storm, one forbidden act of compassion will test everything they believe. Can love survive when even holiness stands in the way? Or will his vow cost them the only miracle they've ever known? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The wind came in hard from the open prairie and sang through every seam of the little barn. Boards creaked. Loose straw skittered along the packed dirt like tiny dancers. Dean Lapp stood inside the doorway, with his shoulders hunched and his wool cap pulled low, checking each stall rope and running his palm along the mare's neck. The animal's breath rose in soft clouds. "Easy, girl," he said. "Storm will pass." He did not believe it. The sky had turned the color of pewter, and the light fell away as if evening had come too early. He slid the big plank across the barn door and stepped into the yard. Snow stung his face at once. It came sideways, gathering in the ruts of the wagon lane and on the split-rail fence. His boots sank to the ankle. He kept his chin down and moved toward the woodpile beside the house, counting steps out of habit. 10 to the corner. 6 more to the pile. The wind grabbed his coat and tugged hard, as if a hand had found him. Something dark lay crumpled by the bottom row of logs. Dean stopped. At first he thought the wind had toppled a bundle of feed sacks. The shape did not move. He wiped his eyes with a rough glove and looked again. A bonnet lay half buried in drifted snow. Below it, a face, chalk white and still, with lashes tipped in ice. "Lord," he said, and dropped to one knee. He did not touch the skin. He slid his coat off his shoulders and spread it like a blanket. The woman was heavy with cold and carried the stiff weight of a body that had fought too long. He turned the coat so only wool would meet her, then worked his arms under the fabric and the edges of her dress. He lifted with a grunt and got both boots under him. The wind hit them both and tried to fold them back to the ground. He leaned into it and took the steps to his door, slow and careful, praying with each one. Inside, the cabin breathed, heat and lamplight. He kicked the door shut with his heel. The iron stove glowed cherry through its small mouth. He laid the woman on a rag rug near the hearth, the wool coat still between them, and went to work fast. He set a kettle on the stove and fed it more wood. He shook out 2 quilts from the cedar chest. He held his hand over the woman's mouth and felt the faintest gust of air. "Stay with me," he said. "You are safe now." He kept his eyes away from her face as much as he could, for modesty and for the ache of seeing someone so close to death. Her cheeks were wind-burned and round. Her hair, what he could see of it, was damp and dark at the edges of the bonnet. Near her hand lay a thin leather Bible tied with a bit of string, and beside it, a folded letter sealed with dark wax that had cracked from the cold. The kettle began to talk. He poured hot water into a tin basin and warmed a cloth. He wrung it out and pressed it to her hands, then her wrists, then the place where her neck met the edge of her dress. Always the cloth between, always a layer. He spoke soft as he worked. "Name is Dean," he said. "You came to my woodpile in a bad hour, but God knows his time." Her lips trembled. A whisper came and vanished. He bent nearer to hear. "Please," she murmured. "I am sorry, I am so sorry." "Hush now," Dean said. "You need not be sorry. Breathe and rest." He ladled water into a small pot and tossed in a pinch of dried herbs that Clara had once said were good for warmth and steadiness. He hacked thin chips from a ham and dropped them into a pan, then thought better of it and set the pan aside. Broth first. Broth would be kinder to a stomach turned by cold. When the cloth had done its warming, he lifted one quilt and laid it over her, then the second. He pulled a chair nearby and sat with his hands folded, watching the light move across the floorboards. He recited a psalm under his breath, one he knew by heart. Outside, the storm hammered the walls and sang in the stovepipe. Inside, the clock on the shelf ticked like a small, brave thing. After a while, the woman's eyes opened. They were brown and wide, unsure of the shape of the room. She tried to sit and could not. "Where am I?" she asked. "Near New Bethesda," he said. "My place. You were at the woodpile." Her gaze found the Bible, then the letter. She made a motion for them. Dean slid both items closer with the toe of his boot. She took the Bible with cold, stiff fingers and held it to her chest. The letter stayed on the floor, the cracked seal like a small wound. "Drink," he said, lifting a cup of warm broth. He wrapped a cloth around the cup to guard his hand and hers, and held it to her mouth so she need not hold it. She drank in small, careful swallows. "Thank you," she said. "I did not mean to trespass." "You are not trespass," he said. "You are a life." The words sounded strange to his own ears, and true. He moved his chair back half a foot. He kept his eyes on the safety of the stove's glow. He had not held a woman since the night his wife had died, in a room made of pain and prayer. He had built a high fence in his mind after that night. He did not climb it. He did not even look at it if he could help it. "What may I call you?" he asked at last. "Alina," she said. "Alina Penwell." She swallowed and looked toward the letter. "There is a name on that paper. A reverend in Abilene. He told me to come this way and show it. It says I keep a good house and pay my own way." Dean nodded. "You may rest from all that now. Tomorrow we will see the bishop. He decides such matters. Tonight, you eat and sleep." She let out a long, thin breath. "I can help. I can scrub. I can sew. Please do not turn me out." He felt the words like a hand pressing on his own ribs. He knew the pull of shame and the wish to be of use. He stirred the fire and said, "You will not be turned out in this weather. That much is settled." The storm deepened. Snow came harder against the panes and tried to pry at the corners. Dean set the kettle again and cleaned his tools, as if order inside could keep chaos outside. He glanced at the letter. The cracked seal bore a church mark and 3 initials. He did not read it. He would not move into another man's words while a living soul lay quiet at his hearth. Alina drifted toward sleep, then woke with a start, clutching the Bible. "How long was I there?" she asked. "Long enough to freeze a body," Dean said. "Not long enough to lose you." She studied his face for a moment, as if to weigh truth. Then she let her eyes close. He watched the rise and fall of the quilts, and listened to the soft sound of breath. He told himself to get up, to sit farther away, to make the boundary clear, but his boots did not move. He sat in the chair with his hands on his knees and felt the ache of old memory stir like embers. When the lamp guttered, he trimmed the wick and added oil. He checked the latch on the door. He looked through the small pane. The world was a white blur and a roar. He thought of the lane to New Bethesda, how it drifted shut when wind came from the west, and how the bishop's house sat just beyond the meeting house, straight and square, with light in 2 windows most evenings. He spread another blanket along the floor between his chair and the hearth, a barrier he could see and mind. He laid his own pillow at the end of it and sat again. He would keep the chair until the first light. He would rest when the light returned. Close to midnight, the wind eased for a breath, and a coyote called from somewhere down in the draw. The kettle popped once and settled. Alina stirred and said, "Do you have children?" "No," Dean said. The word came thick. He swallowed. "No." "I am sorry," she said, in that drowsy way of someone already slipping back to sleep. "I did not mean to pry." "It is all right," Ha said. He closed his eyes and saw another winter night. He saw a small bed and a smaller stillness, and a sheet pulled up too high. He gripped the edge of the chair until the knuckles went pale. Then he opened his eyes and set them on the good and ordinary things of the room: the stove, the kettle, the stacked plates, the neat row of tools on their pegs. He prayed in a whisper for the woman, for wisdom at first light, for mercy that did not turn to pride, and for a heart that would not break its vows. He asked for safe passage to the bishop in the morning. He asked that words would be given at the proper time. He ended with gratitude, because that was the only way he knew to stand up again after any long dark. Toward dawn, the storm began to tire. The edge of the window glass turned from black to dull iron to pale gray. Dean rose, stretched the ache from his back, and went to the door. He pushed it open a crack and felt the cold reach in and touch his cheeks like a warning. The yard lay deep and drifted, fences rounded into strange shapes. The lane would be hard going, but it could be done with the mule and the flat sled. He shut the door and turned to the hearth. Alina's eyes were open. She looked stronger by a little. Color had come into her face. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Dean answered. "If you can keep down a bit more broth, we will try the road when the mule is harnessed. You will ride on the sled with quilts, and we will move slow." She nodded. "I can help harness." "You will rest," he said, gentle but firm. "There is time for help when you are warm through." He set the cup in her hands with the cloth wrapped thick, then stepped back to the doorway of the small bedroom to fetch a second quilt for the sled. His boot heel caught the edge of the rug, and he steadied himself on the doorframe, feeling foolish for the small clatter in a quiet room. Alina smiled, and the smile changed her face. It made it younger and kinder and more alive than the chalk-white mask he had carried through the storm. "Thank you," she said again. "Much obliged to the Lord," he said. "He blew you to my woodpile. That is how I reckon it." The clock ticked. The stove hummed. Outside, the prairie waited under a clean new sheet. Dean wrapped the quilts tighter around the woman, drew his cap down once more, and stepped out to harness the mule. The day had begun, and the road to New Bethesda waited, full of questions and light enough now to see the first bend. The sky cleared by mid-morning, though the air still bit like iron. Dean packed the sled with quilts and the small tin kettle for warm water. Alina sat upright, her Bible held tight against her lap. The mule leaned into the harness, hooves crunching through drifts. The road to New Bethesda wound between low hills spotted with cottonwoods. Each rise showed more snow, more emptiness, and then, at last, the faint smoke from chimneys ahead. Dean kept one hand on the reins and one near the brake handle. "It's not far now," he said. We'll see the bishop, and he'll tell us what's best." Alina nodded. "I've lived by rules before," she murmured. "If they're fair ones, I'll follow them." They reached the edge of the Amish settlement near noon. Neat fields, bare and sleeping under snow, stretched behind small, whitewashed houses. The meeting house stood square at the crossroads, beside a line of plain buggies waiting like silent watchers. Dean helped Alina down without touching her skin. They crossed the yard toward a doorway framed by icicles. Inside, the room smelled of wood smoke and beeswax polish. Bishop Reuben Stoltzfus looked up from a desk where he was sealing a letter. A large man, he had a graying beard and the heavy calm of authority. "Dean," he said, "you've come early for counsel." His eyes moved to Alina. "And you've brought a guest." Dean inclined his head. "Found her near froze at my woodpile yesterday. She carries a letter from a reverend in Abilene." Reuben opened the letter, reading in silence. Then he laid it flat on the desk. "It says she's of good Christian manner and looking for honest work." He studied Alina. "You are English?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. "My people were Methodist. My father passed, and my mother sent me away to kin who did not want me. I can cook, sew, and mind a house. I ask only for a place to earn my keep." The bishop folded his hands. "We are a small flock. Outsiders bring trials when they stay too long." "I mean no trouble," she said. Dean spoke quietly. "She saved my conscience, Bishop. I could not leave her to die." Reuben's gaze softened for a moment. "No one should die in the snow." He paused, thinking. "Very well. She may stay, if she works off her keep. Your home has space, Dean. You will be responsible for her behavior." Dean bowed his head. "I will answer for her." Alina's eyes glistened. "Thank you," she whispered. When they stepped outside, the afternoon sun burned pale behind clouds. The wind had gone still, leaving the world hushed. Dean helped her back onto the sled. Neither spoke until the mule began its slow pull toward the homestead again. By the time they reached the cabin, the light was fading. Alina moved about the house as if to repay kindness with action, sweeping, washing, setting the kettle. She found flour and lard, worked dough by the hearth, and soon the smell of biscuits filled the small space. Dean mended a broken chair leg, pretending not to notice the sound of her humming. When supper was ready, she poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one before him. "I hope it's not too strong," she said. He tasted it. "Strong's good in this weather." A faint smile passed between them. The snow outside glowed blue in the moonlight, and for the first time in months, Dean felt the weight of his cabin ease a little. After supper, Alina folded the remaining biscuits in cloth and set them aside. She stood near the stove, her hands clasped as if waiting for instruction. "You've been kind," she said. "I'll do my best to be worth it." Dean nodded. "Rest now. We'll see what chores the morning brings." He took his lantern to the workshop and stayed there a while, shaping wood until his thoughts quieted. When he returned, the fire was low but steady, and Alina slept under the quilts on the cot he'd made near the stove. Her face looked younger without worry. The Bible rested on her chest, open to a psalm. Dean sat in his chair by the hearth, the tools of his trade still in his hand. The mule shifted in the barn, the clock ticked, and a kind of peace settled over the house. Fragile but real. He bowed his head and whispered a simple prayer of thanks for mercy given and mercy still to learn. The first full week passed under gray skies and the faint drip of melting snow. Each morning, Alina rose before daylight, stirring the stove until it glowed, setting coffee and porridge on the table before Dean came in from tending the mule. He watched her move about the small room, steady, gentle, always humming. She was quiet company, grateful for every small kindness. On the 7th morning, he hitched the wagon to deliver a carved table to a farmer west of town. Alina rode along, wrapped in a shawl, her cheeks bright from the cold. She carried herself with dignity, though the stares from neighbors stung her. Children pointed, women turned away. Dean said little. He had learned that silence often spoke best. At the farm, the buyer inspected the table. "Fine work as always," he said. Then his eyes flicked to Alina. "Brought yourself a helper, have you?" His tone was curious, not kind. Dean kept his voice even. "A housekeeper, hired by the bishop's word." The man only grunted and handed over 2 silver coins. "Word's already going round. Folks say you've got a woman under your roof. Ain't your way, is it?" Dean's jaw tightened. "The bishop knows every bit of it." Back on the wagon, Alina spoke softly. "I don't wish to shame you." "You haven't," he said. "People talk when the fields are frozen. Gives them warmth." By Sunday, the gossip had spread through New Bethesda like wildfire through dry grass. In the meeting house, whispers trailed them down the aisle. Alina kept her head bowed, but her shoulders trembled. The bishop led the prayer, his voice heavy with warning about appearances of impropriety. Dean sat straight-backed, eyes fixed on the worn boards of the pew ahead. After service, Clara came up behind them outside the meeting house. "You'll not stop tongues by hiding," she said, her tone low but sharp. "You should wed or part ways, else the bishop will press the matter." Alina flinched. "Marriage?" she said. "He hardly knows me." Clara looked at Dean. "Then send her elsewhere before they ruin both your names." Dean's voice was steady but distant. "The bishop decides." The next day, the village women came by to collect quilts for mending. They entered Dean's yard, glancing through windows, whispering behind gloved hands. Alina kept working, sweeping the porch, jaw set hard. That evening she faced Dean at the supper table, eyes bright with shame. "I can't stay," she said. "I'll go back to Abilene when the road clears." "You'll freeze," Dean said. "I can find work in town." He looked at her hands, raw from scrubbing, trembling slightly. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet. Let the bishop speak first." Outside, the night was clear, the stars bright and cold. He stepped out to the barn after supper, fed the mule, and prayed there where no one could hear. He asked for wisdom, for peace, for strength to do what was right. But the echo of Clara's words haunted him. Wed or send her away. The next afternoon, as he planed a board, smooth, a shadow darkened his doorway. Bishop Reuben stood there, face stern as the carved saints on an old chapel door. "We must talk," he said. Dean wiped his hands on his apron. "I figured as much." The bishop's voice was grave. "You've brought confusion into the community. Folks are uneasy. You'll either make her your wife or let her go." Dean felt the world narrow to the scent of sawdust and the creak of the wind outside. He thought of Alina's bowed head, her trembling hands, her soft hum over the morning fire. And then he thought of his vow, a promise to God sealed in grief and tears on the night his wife died. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Then God help me choose right." That night, Alina sat near the stove, mending a torn sleeve from one of his shirts. Dean stood by the window, watching the dark. "The bishop will come tomorrow," he said. "I understand." Her voice barely carried. "Whatever he says, I'll go peaceably." Dean turned. "It may not come to that." She looked up, startled. What else could it be? He didn't answer. The clock ticked between them. Outside, snow began again, soft and slow. The morning broke with low clouds and the smell of snow returning. Dean had been awake since before dawn, sitting at the table, hands folded over the worn grain. Alina moved quietly around him, setting a pot on the stove, though neither had much appetite. When the knock came at the door, she flinched. Bishop Reuben stood there, heavy cloak dusted white. "It is time," he said. Dean nodded and reached for his hat. Alina hesitated, eyes wide with dread. "We'll go together," Dean told her gently. The meeting house was half full when they arrived. Curious faces turned their way. The bishop walked to the front and laid his Bible on the stand. "We have before us a matter that troubles this fellowship," he said, voice echoing off the plain wooden walls. "A man and woman, not wed, living under one roof. They claim decency, yet our ways must be kept pure." Dean rose slowly. "Bishop, I never sought to bring reproach. The woman was dying in the snow. I gave her shelter as I would any soul." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One of the older men spoke. "Then why keep her still? You know how it appears." Dean turned his hat in his hands. "Because sending her out now would break more than the rules. It would break what's right." The bishop's brow furrowed. "Then there is one remedy left. Marry her." Alina gasped softly. "Sir, I would not bind him to such pity." Dean's voice steadied. "It is not pity." He took a breath, eyes fixed on the bishop. "I will marry her, yet I will not touch her. My vow before God stands." A silence fell so deep it seemed to swallow the ticking of the wall clock. Then Clara, standing at the back, let out a breath like a laugh and whispered, "He always did have his own way." The bishop frowned, but there was respect in his tone when he said, "So be it. You will be wed before us, but your promise of chastity you must answer for yourself." Dean nodded once. "I will." The ceremony was brief. 2 vows, 1 prayer, and the sound of the wind pushing against the door. Dean placed a simple ring on Alina's finger, using a strip of cloth between his hand and hers. Her eyes filled with tears. When the bishop finished, she whispered, "I'll honor your vow, sir." Afterward, they left through a line of solemn faces. Some pitied her, some judged him. None understood them. Outside, the snow had started again, small flakes spinning through pale light. Dean helped her into the wagon without a word. The ride home was quiet. Only the creak of wheels and the muffled thud of hooves broke the silence. Near the gate, Alina finally spoke. "I never expected such kindness." Dean shook his head. "Kindness would have been letting you choose freely. This is obedience. Mine, not yours." When they reached the cabin, he lifted her down carefully, using the edge of his coat as a barrier between them. Inside, the fire had gone low. Alina stirred it to life, the flames reflecting in her damp eyes. "Will you take the bed?" she asked softly. "You keep it," he said. "I'll use the chair." She nodded and turned away so he wouldn't see the tears she wiped with her sleeve. Later, she laid her Bible open on the table and read by lamplight until her voice steadied. Dean sat near the stove, carving small shapes into wood, a habit for restless hands. Neither spoke again that night. When the clock struck 10, he whispered a prayer and moved to the doorway. "We're bound before God now," he said. "That means we live honest. I'll provide what's needed. You'll have your peace here." "I already do," she said quietly. Dean blew out the lamp. The room fell to shadow, except for the glow from the stove. The snow pressed soft against the windows. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, lonely but alive. Dean sat back in his chair and listened until the sound faded. In the dark, Alina whispered another prayer, one not for rules or reputation, but for courage to live in a house built on mercy. Morning sunlight slipped through the frosted window panes, laying soft gold across the cabin floor. The wedding day felt like a dream Dean couldn't quite believe had happened. He rose quietly, stoked the stove, and stepped outside to break the ice in the water trough. The mule snorted steam into the cold air. Inside, Alina moved gently, setting out bread and coffee as if she'd been doing it her whole life. They began to find their rhythm. Dean worked in his carpentry shed from sunrise to dusk, the steady rasp of his plane cutting through the quiet. Alina swept, baked, and mended until the cabin shone. She hummed hymns while she worked, soft and comforting. Some evenings she stepped to the doorway to watch him carve chairs. He would nod without speaking. Their silence grew companionable, filled with small, wordless trust. A week later, she followed him to the workshop carrying a basket of biscuits and jam. "You work too long without eating," she said. He smiled faintly. "Hard to stop once the wood starts listening." She laughed, a sound so warm it startled him. He wiped sawdust from his hands. "You've made the place feel different." "Cleaner?" she teased. "Alive," he said simply. The days lengthened into early spring. Alina sold a few of Dean's chairs to travelers at the trading post. Her friendly voice and easy manner earned fairer prices than he ever had. When she returned home with extra coin, she laid it quietly on the table. "For supplies," she said. Dean studied the money, then her proud smile. "You've done well," he answered. That night, while they ate by lamplight, he found himself watching her hands, how gentle they moved as she passed him the bread. He caught himself and looked away quickly, ashamed at the warmth stirring in him. Later, as the wind picked up outside, Alina spoke from near the fire. "You work hard but never talk of yourself. Why is that?" Dean kept his eyes on the glowing coals. "Not much to tell. I was married once. She died birthing our child. Neither of them made it through the night." Alina's voice softened. "I'm sorry. Truly." He nodded. "Since then, I promised God I'd live without a wife's touch. Some vows keep a man upright." She looked into the firelight. "And some keep him lonely." He didn't answer. The clock ticked between them, slow and steady as a heartbeat. Over the next days, their routine deepened. She packed his midday meal and left it by the door before heading to hang laundry. He fixed her spinning wheel. In the evenings, they shared quiet prayer, his deep voice blending with her softer one. For the first time since his wife's death, Dean began to feel peace. Fragile, but real. One night, as the lamp burned low, Alina said softly, "You gave me a home, even when you didn't have to. I don't forget such things." He looked up from his carving. "You gave it life again." They sat for a long moment in the gentle hush of the cabin, the only sound the whisper of snow melting from the roof. As he banked the fire for the night, Dean felt a stirring in his chest he couldn't quite name. Not desire, not yet. Something slower and deeper, like thawing earth under frost. By the second week of March, the snow had begun to melt from the ridges. Patches of brown earth showed through the white, and the creek beside Dean's pasture sang with new water. Life felt almost peaceful. Dean spent his days in the workshop shaping a set of oak chairs for a merchant in Dodge City, while Alina tended the garden patch she had cleared from the thawed ground. That evening, a gray rain rolled in from the west. The wind picked up, driving sheets of it across the plains. Dean checked the barn doors before dark, making sure the animals were safe. Later, when the storm was at its height, he heard the mule bray and something knock against the outer wall. "I'll see to it," he told Alina, reaching for his lantern. She started to follow, but he shook his head. "Best stay in where it's warm." He pulled his coat on and stepped into the downpour. The barn creaked against the wind. As he swung the door open, his lantern light cut through the shadows and caught a small, frightened face peering from behind a hay bale. Dean froze. The child couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, thin as a fence rail, soaked to the skin. The boy's hair was black, his eyes wide and sharp with fear. "What are you doing here, son?" Dean asked gently. The boy flinched at the sound of his voice and backed farther into the straw. "Don't send me back," he whispered. Dean crouched low, setting the lantern on the ground so the light fell easy. "No one's sending you anywhere till I know what's what. You got a name?" The boy hesitated. "Joseph." "Well, Joseph, you picked a rough night to sleep in a barn." Dean straightened. "Come on in. We'll get you dry." Joseph shook his head hard. "They'll find me if I go inside." "Who will?" "The man with the cane. He said I had to work or get whipped." Dean's chest tightened. "Where are your folks?" "My ma's gone. She was Apache." The boy's voice broke. "She died when the sickness came." Dean exhaled slowly. "All right, you'll stay the night, but I'll not have you freezing in this barn." He wrapped his coat around the boy's shoulders and led him toward the cabin. Alina opened the door at once, her eyes widening at the sight of the small stranger. "Mercy," she whispered. "Come here, child." She knelt by the fire, rubbing his hands between hers to warm them. Dean explained what little he knew. "Found him in the hay. Says his ma's gone. Worked for a farmer who treated him cruel." Alina's expression softened with fierce tenderness. "He'll stay till he's well." Dean hesitated. "The bishop won't take kindly to us keeping him." "Then we won't tell the bishop," she said simply. He met her eyes, steady, bright with conviction, and realized arguing would do no good. "Just for tonight," he said. They fed the boy broth and bread. He ate like one who hadn't seen a full meal in days. Alina tucked him near the hearth with an extra quilt and murmured a prayer over him until his breathing slowed into sleep. Dean stood by the window, staring into the rain. "We can't keep him long," he said. Alina looked up from the sleeping boy. "You think God brought him to your barn for nothing?" Dean said nothing. His vow had already carried him down one road of mercy that cost him peace. Another step, he feared, might cost him the rest. But when he looked at Joseph's small face, pale and calm against the quilt, he felt something inside him soften. A piece of his heart he thought had frozen long ago. Later, as the rain eased, he whispered, "He can stay till he's strong enough to walk." Alina smiled through tears. "Then he'll heal fast, you'll see." Dean sat in his chair until late, listening to the boy's even breathing. Outside, the wind fell quiet. Inside, something new had begun, small, dangerous, and holy. The next morning broke pale and cold, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm. A faint mist rose from the thawing ground. Inside the cabin, the smell of coffee mixed with the smoke from damp wood. Joseph slept curled near the hearth, his thin frame rising and falling under a quilt. Alina bent over him, brushing hair from his forehead. Dean watched quietly. He felt both peace and unease, like a man standing on a bridge unsure which side he belonged to. "You'll spoil him with kindness," he said gently. Alina looked up. "He's had too little of it." By noon, Joseph was strong enough to help Dean sweep the workshop floor. He moved carefully, his eyes bright with gratitude. Alina brought them lunch and smiled at the sight. two souls who had known loneliness finding work side by side. But peace rarely lasted long in New Bethesda. That afternoon, a shadow fell across the barn door. Bishop Reuben dismounted his horse and called out, "Dean! A word!" Dean stepped forward, wiping his hands. "Bishop, you're far from the meeting house today." "I came to check on your welfare," Reuben said. His eyes moved past Dean toward the barn interior. "I thought I saw a small face at your window yesterday." Dean forced a calm smile. "You might have seen Clara's boy. He visits sometimes." The bishop nodded slowly, his eyes searching. "See that temptation doesn't find you, Dean. One good deed can turn to pride if handled poorly." "I'll remember that." When the bishop rode away, Alina emerged from behind the woodpile, her cheeks pale. "He nearly saw Joseph." Dean nodded grimly. "We'll have to be careful." That night, after Joseph fell asleep, Dean and Alina sat at the table in the low glow of lamplight. She spoke first. "If he finds out, they'll take the boy away." Dean's voice was heavy. "He's the bishop. It's his duty to keep the rules." "And it's ours to keep mercy," Alina replied. "If the law forgets kindness, someone must remember it." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You speak bold for one new to our ways." "I've lived enough years without mercy to know its worth." Her words struck him deep. He stared at the lamplight until his eyes blurred. Then he rose and opened the door to the cold night. "I need air," he said. Outside, the stars hung sharp above the fields. He walked to the barn, the frost crunching under his boots. Joseph stirred from his pallet of straw when Dean entered. "Did I do wrong?" the boy asked sleepily. Dean crouched beside him. "No, son. You did right by surviving." He hesitated, then bowed his head. "Lord, show me if mercy can still be plain," he whispered. A sliver of moonlight cut through the rafters, catching the dust like snow suspended in air. The mule shifted softly, the smell of hay and life thick around them. Dean rose, feeling a strange stillness settle over him, a kind of answer he couldn't put into words. In the cabin, Alina watched from the window, her hands clasped at her chest. She saw him kneel beside the boy, and knew, without hearing a single word, that something inside him had shifted. The next morning, Dean woke earlier than usual. The frost sparkled like broken glass on the fence rails. He felt lighter, though the world around him hadn't changed. When Alina set his coffee before him, he met her eyes. "He stays," he said simply. She smiled in quiet relief. "Then we'll thank God for his mercy." He nodded, though part of him still feared what it would cost. Spring came with slow thaw and early green shoots in the fields. The creek ran high, the smell of wet earth everywhere. For weeks, peace held steady in Dean's cabin. Joseph fetched water and stacked kindling, while Alina taught him to read short psalms by the fire each evening. Dean watched them with quiet wonder, the house alive in a way he hadn't felt for years. But whispers traveled fast through a small settlement. One morning, Clara arrived in her buggy, face tight with worry. "Dean," she said, stepping down, "there's talk again, of a child at your place. Reuben's heard it." Dean's stomach turned. "So it's begun." Before he could speak further, the crunch of hooves sounded on the lane. Bishop Reuben rode up, cloak snapping in the wind. He dismounted and strode toward the cabin without greeting. "I warned you once," he said. "Now I find the rumors true." Alina stepped forward, her chin high. "If it's sin to feed a hungry child, then call me sinner." The bishop's face hardened. "You defy our order. The child will be taken to the sheriff in Dodge City. You will both answer for deceit." Dean felt his pulse hammering. He had obeyed Reuben all his life. But now, standing beside Alina and the trembling boy, obedience felt smaller than truth. "He's no threat," Dean said. "He's God's child, same as we are." Reuben's eyes flashed. "You shelter rebellion in your home. Have you forgotten your vows?" Dean's voice rose, steadier now. "I remember every word. I vowed to live clean before God. Today I keep that vow." Silence filled the yard, except for the clop of Reuben's restless horse. Alina took Joseph's hand and pulled him close. Her voice trembled but did not break. "You taught mercy once, Bishop. Don't forget what it sounds like." Reuben hesitated, then turned away. "If you choose pride over repentance, you will be shunned. Until you confess, no hand in this community will greet yours." He swung into the saddle and rode off, snowmelt splashing under the hooves. When the dust settled, Alina let out a shaky breath. "So that's the end of it." Dean shook his head. "No, it's the beginning." That evening, the sky flamed with sunset, red and gold through the last thin clouds. The three of them ate supper in silence. Joseph looked from one face to the other. "Will they come for me?" he asked. Dean reached out, resting a hand near the boy's shoulder without quite touching. "Not while I've breath." Alina smiled faintly. "Then we stand together." The next morning, the isolation began. Neighbors who once nodded from their wagons turned away. The blacksmith refused to take Dean's payment for a repaired hinge. Alina returned from the trading post with unsold bread and downcast eyes. That night, as they sat in the soft glow of the lamp, Dean whispered, "We may lose everything for this." Alina looked toward the boy asleep on the cot. "Not everything," she said. "We still have what's right." Dean studied her face, tired, brave, shining in the firelight, and felt gratitude settle where fear had been. He reached across the table and took her hand through the fold of her sleeve, fabric against fabric. "Then we'll face it together," he said. She didn't pull away. "That's all I ever asked." The shunning changed everything. Days passed in deep quiet. No neighbors came by, no trade wagons stopped for Dean's work. Even Clara's visits grew few, only quick drops of herbs or bread at the gate, her eyes sad but loyal. Still, life went on inside their small cabin. Alina baked, sang softly while she mended, and tried to keep the boys' spirits bright. Dean found work for his hands, fixing the fence, shaping wood, mending the worn wheels of their wagon. The three of them became a family in all but name. Then came the long, cold snap. It arrived without warning, a hard wind out of the north, freezing everything overnight. The well iced over. Smoke from the chimney drifted sideways, then vanished in the gust. Dean chopped ice from the trough while Joseph held the lantern, his little hands shaking from cold. By nightfall, Joseph began to cough. At first it was light, but by morning his face burned with fever. Alina pressed a damp cloth to his brow. "He needs laudanum," she said, her voice tight. "There's none left." Dean stared at the snow whipping outside. Dodge City was 15 miles away. "I can make it if I leave now," he said. Alina gripped his arm. "The river's swollen from thaw. It's too dangerous." He shook his head. "If I wait, the fever takes him." She said nothing, only fetched his heavy coat and tucked dried bread and jerky into his saddlebag. "Then go fast and come back faster." Dean mounted his horse and urged it through the storm. Snow blinded him, wind cutting through every layer. He rode bent low, praying with each mile. The world narrowed to white blur and pounding hooves. By dusk, he reached the edge of Dodge City, lamplights flickering faint in the swirling snow. He found the apothecary shuttered for the night. He banged on the door until a weary man opened. "Laudanum," Dean said, "for a fevered child." The apothecary studied him, then handed over a small bottle. "Mind your footing on the river road. It's near overflowed." Dean paid with his last coin and turned back toward home. The return ride was worse, snow thicker, the river roaring beside the path. He reached the crossing after dark. Ice slabs broke and churned in black water. He tried the first step onto the bridge plank. The horse slipped. Dean leapt clear as the animal went down, the bottle clutched in his gloved hand. The current tore at his legs, dragging him under icy foam. He surfaced, gasping, flung toward the bank. The bottle struck a rock and shattered. For a moment he lay still in the freezing water, then clawed his way out, shaking and half blind. "Lord, help me get home," he rasped. He stumbled through the dark until the shape of his cabin rose through the snow. The lantern still burned in the window. He pushed through the door and fell to his knees inside. Alina cried out and caught him by the shoulders. "Dean, you're frozen!" She pulled off his soaked coat, dragged him near the stove. He tried to speak, but his lips barely moved. "Medicine. Broke," he whispered. "Then God will have to be our medicine," she said, wrapping him in every quilt she could find. Her arms went around him, not through a sleeve, not through a coat, but skin to skin, her warmth against his cold. She held him close and prayed aloud, tears falling onto his face. Hours passed before his shivering eased. When he finally opened his eyes, dawn light spilled across the floor. The storm had passed. Joseph slept fitfully, but breathing steadier. Alina knelt beside Dean, her hair loose and face pale with worry. "You'd have died if you stayed out another hour," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "You broke my vow." "I broke death's grip, not your promise," she said softly. "God made warmth to save, not to destroy." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not sin, but grace. The wall he had built around his heart crumbled in silence. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving the plains glittering under a hard, cold sun. Steam rose from the roof where snow melted, and the world looked peaceful, though inside the cabin, peace was nowhere to be found. Dean sat wrapped in a blanket near the stove, his body weak but his mind burning with worry. Alina ladled hot broth into a cup and held it out to him. "You need strength," she said. He took it with trembling hands. "If Reuben hears of this, what happened last night, he'll cast us out." Alina's eyes were firm. "Then let him. I'd rather be shunned than let you die." Before Dean could answer, a knock thundered at the door. Heavy, sure, and cold as judgment. Alina froze. Dean rose slowly, every muscle aching. He opened the door to find Bishop Reuben standing there, cloak rimmed with frost, 2 elders behind him. "Word spreads fast," the bishop said. "A woman's touch has broken the vow you swore before God." Dean steadied himself. "She saved my life." Reuben's voice grew harder. "Sin often dresses as mercy. You were warned." "Then hear this," Dean said quietly. "If mercy be sin, I'll take it with joy." The bishop's face reddened. "You are excommunicated. From this day forward, no man or woman of our order shall speak your name." He turned and rode off, leaving only the crunch of hooves in the frost. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind creaked through the eaves. Alina stepped close, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry, Dean. I've cost you everything." He shook his head. "No. You gave me back what I lost. Faith that still lives when rules die." That evening, Dean packed quietly. He took his chisels, his hammer, and a few planks of walnut wood. Alina wrapped food and blankets. Joseph watched from the doorway, holding a small sack of his own treasures, a carved horse Dean had made, a slingshot, and a Bible Alina had given him. "Where will we go?" the boy asked. Dean looked out toward the pale horizon, where work and kindness still have room. By dawn, they hitched the wagon. Frost hung like glass beads from the trees. Alina tied the last bundle tight and climbed aboard beside Dean. Joseph nestled under quilts in the back. Dean took one last look at the cabin that had been his home and his prison both. Then he flicked the reins. The mule started forward, its hooves crunching over frozen ruts. The wind was sharp, but sunlight touched the fields in gold streaks. Behind them, the small shape of their home grew smaller until it vanished altogether. By midday, they stopped at the river crossing. The ice had broken and run clean. Dean stared at the current, calm now after its fury. "Sometimes," he said, "the flood must come before the clearing." Alina smiled faintly. "And sometimes what's washed away needed washing." They crossed in silence, 3 shadows moving westward along the trail. When night came, they made camp near a line of cottonwoods. The fire crackled softly, throwing orange light across their faces. Joseph fell asleep first. Alina sat with her hands folded, the firelight painting gold across her hair. "We're alone now," she said quietly. Dean nodded. "No, just separate. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "I'd follow you anywhere, even if no one called it right." He met her gaze, the embers glinting in his eyes. "Then I'll make a place where right still means mercy." The fire snapped, and a coyote called somewhere out in the dark, lonely but alive. Dean listened to the sound and realized that though the world had cast them out, something far greater had drawn them together. By the time the plains turned green again, the little family had settled on the edge of Dodge City. The town bustled with traders, rail workers, and families from every corner of the frontier. Dean rented a weathered shed behind a feed store and turned it into a workshop. From sunrise to sunset, the rhythmic sound of his hammer and plane filled the yard. Alina cooked for laborers and washed clothes for travelers, while Joseph ran errands and brought home coins that jingled like small triumphs. Their new life was humble, but it was theirs. No one asked questions about their past, and that alone felt like grace. In the evenings, they sat together on the step of their small room watching the sun fall behind the plains. Alina mended clothes while Dean whittled wood into toys for Joseph. Horses, soldiers, and a cross that gleamed when polished. The boy played nearby, laughter soft against the hum of the town's distant bustle. One day, a traveler stopped by the shed, admiring Dean's work. "Fine chairs," the man said. "You sign your pieces?" Dean shook his head. "No call for that." "You should," the man replied. "You've got a craftsman's hand." After he left, Alina smiled. "He's right. You build more than chairs, Dean. You build peace." He chuckled. "Never thought I'd find peace in the noise of a town." "Maybe peace don't belong to quiet places alone," she said, her eyes warm. By summer, word of Dean's workmanship spread. Ranchers and townsfolk alike came for his furniture. Alina's cooking earned her a spot selling pies at the Saturday market. She'd set out her stall with a red check cloth, greeting everyone with a kind smile. Some men teased her about her size, but she only laughed and said, "The Lord makes all shapes with his own measure." Her cheer won hearts faster than gossip ever could. Joseph started school at the mission hall, learning letters and sums. In the evenings, he'd read his small Bible aloud while Dean sanded. Wood and Alina kneaded dough. His favorite verse was from the Gospel of Matthew, about those who are merciful finding mercy in return. One late evening, when the light was soft and gold through the window, Joseph climbed onto Dean's knee. "When can I call you Da?" he asked. Dean froze, tools still in his hand. Alina looked up from her sewing. The boy's eyes were wide, earnest. "You already feel like one." Dean swallowed, his throat thick. "You can call me that now, son." Joseph grinned and threw his arms around his neck. Alina turned away, tears bright in her eyes. That night, as they prayed together, Dean's voice trembled. "Thank you, Lord," he said softly, "for a home that didn't start with walls but with hearts." Outside, the lamps of Dodge City glowed like fallen stars. The sound of a fiddle drifted faintly from a saloon, but inside the little home, peace reigned, a peace born not of rules, but of love hard-earned and honest. As they sat by the window, Alina leaned closer, her hand brushing his arm lightly. He didn't pull away. For the first time, the touch felt not forbidden, but blessed. Autumn came early that year. The Kansas sky turned crisp and blue, the air full of the smell of cut hay and wood smoke. Business was steady at Dean's workshop. His sturdy chairs filled porches up and down the main street. Alina's pies became famous among railroad men. Joseph had grown tall, with a ready grin and hands quick to help. Their little home, once borrowed space, had become a warm haven filled with laughter and hymns. One morning, Clara arrived unannounced in her buggy. Her face looked drawn from travel. "Dean," she said, stepping down, "I bring word from New Bethesda. The bishop, Reuben, is ill. Fever's taken him hard on his supply trip. They left him in town with no one to tend." Alina's brow creased. "No one? Not even his own kin?" Clara shook her head. "He's alone, same as he left you." Dean set down his tools. "Where?" "On the far side of town, at the wagon camp by the livery," Clara replied. "They say he won't last the week." Dean hesitated. Memories rose. Judgment, exile, shame. But over it all came the steady echo of a verse Joseph had read the night before. "Love your enemies, bless them that curse you." He looked at Alina. "We'll go." The camp smelled of sickness and dust. Reuben lay on a pallet beneath a wagon, his beard damp with sweat, his breath ragged. When he saw Dean, disbelief flickered across his face. "You," he croaked. "Why come? Have you not lost enough by my hand?" Dean knelt beside him, wringing out a cloth in cool water. "A man's not called to measure mercy by debt." Alina brought broth and spooned it carefully between his lips. "You saved none who turned you away," she said gently. "But you saved us once, by forcing us to choose what mattered." Reuben's eyes filled with tears. "I cast you out for pride," he whispered, "and found none of my own peace since." Days passed. They took turns tending him, Dean washing the fevered man's face, Alina praying aloud in the soft evening hours, Joseph fetching water from the pump. Little by little color returned to Reuben's cheeks. He woke one morning with clearer eyes and said, "You should hate me." Dean smiled faintly. "If I'd carried that, I'd have frozen before the first spring." Reuben's gaze dropped. "I was wrong, Dean. I mistook rule for righteousness." "The Lord don't need us perfect," Dean said, "just willing." When Reuben finally sat upright, the autumn light slanted through the canvas above him. "Let me see your family," he said. Dean called them over. Joseph approached shyly, clutching his small Bible. Alina stood behind him, her smile gentle. Reuben took the boy's hand. "You are the proof I was blind," he said softly. "I'll not rest till I've set this right." By the end of the week, the bishop, thinner but steadier, was ready to travel back to New Bethesda. He turned to Dean. "Ride with me, both of you. The people must hear what grace looks like when it walks back through their door." Dean met Alina's eyes, then nodded. "We'll come." That night, as they packed for the journey, Alina said quietly. Strange how the one who cast us out may be the one to call us home. Dean smiled. Mercy has a way of turning its own circle. The morning they left Dodge City, a low mist hung over the prairie. The wagon creaked beneath their weight. Dean guiding the mule, Alina sitting beside him, Joseph drowsing under a quilt in back. Bishop Reuben rode his horse behind them, his posture still frail, but his face filled with quiet resolve. The road stretched long and empty, the same road that had once carried Dean away in shame. Now it felt different. Lighter somehow, like each hoofbeat was a prayer whispered into the open sky. By mid-afternoon, they reached the outskirts of New Bethesda. Smoke curled from chimneys, the plain fences stood just as Dean had built them years ago, and the sound of distant hammers echoed from the blacksmith's yard. Yet the sight struck him hard. "Feels smaller," he said. Alina looked at him, her smile faint. "No, Dean, you've just grown." At the meeting house, the bishop's horse stumbled slightly as he dismounted. Clara was the first to see them. She let out a sharp gasp and hurried across the yard, skirts gathering dust. "You fool, man," she said, half laughing, half crying. "I knew Mercy would find you before Pride did." Dean embraced her warmly. "We've come home, Clara. The long way around." Within the hour, word spread through the settlement. By the time the bishop rang the meeting house bell, nearly every family had gathered. Men in dark coats, women in bonnets, children clutching their mothers' hands. The same faces that had turned away now watched in uneasy silence. Reuben stepped forward, leaning on his cane. His voice carried strong, though his body trembled. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "months ago I cast out a man and woman for breaking a vow. I believed obedience alone could save us. But while I guarded the letter of law, they lived its spirit." He turned toward Dean and Alina. "They fed the hungry. They sheltered a child no one else would claim. And when sickness struck me down, they nursed me back to life without bitterness." A murmur moved through the crowd. Dean stood beside Alina, her hand brushing his sleeve for courage. Reuben went on, his voice thick with emotion. "I called them sinners. Yet they were the ones who remembered grace. I come not to judge them again, but to ask their forgiveness, and yours." Silence fell like snowfall. Then Clara spoke up from the back. "Well, Bishop, it's about time someone remembered what mercy looks like." Laughter, soft and uncertain, rippled through the crowd. The bishop raised his hand. "Let it be known that the shunning is lifted. Dean Lapp and his wife, Alina, are welcome among us once more." Dean swallowed hard. "Bishop," he said quietly, "we don't seek rank or favor, only peace." Reuben nodded. "Then take it, freely given." A few of the women approached Alina first. One pressed a loaf of bread into her hands. Another whispered, "You did what I wish I'd had the courage to do." Tears welled in Alina's eyes. Dean saw the hardness in her melt away, replaced by something gentler than pride, something like healing. Joseph darted from the wagon and joined a group of children, his laughter bright and clear. Clara wiped her eyes. "That sound," she said softly, "ought to be our hymn this morning." The sun broke through the clouds just then, gold spilling over the fields. Dean looked out across the familiar land, the barn he'd built, the road he'd traveled, the meeting house where his world had once broken apart. It all seemed new again. As evening settled, neighbors lingered outside, sharing food and stories. No one spoke of rules. They spoke instead of harvests, rain, and kindness, simple things that bound them stronger than any law. Dean stood beside Alina on the church steps. "We walked through fire," he said quietly, "and it led us home." Alina slipped her hand into his, no cloth between them now. Sometimes home is where forgiveness waits. The bell tolled once more, its sound deep and full. The crowd turned toward the horizon, faces bright with hope. For the first time since winter, Dean felt not judged, not lost, but redeemed. Spring warmed the plains with tender mercy. Wildflowers spread across the meadows, and the wind carried the scent of lilacs and turned earth. Dean rose each morning to the sound of meadowlarks, while Alina baked bread in the small kitchen. Joseph ran barefoot through the yard, his laughter chasing away the last ghosts of winter. The bishop had invited them back to the meeting house for one final gathering, a renewal of vows before the whole community. Dean dressed in his plain black coat, hands trembling as he fastened the buttons. Alina tied her bonnet and smoothed her apron, her eyes shining with quiet peace. "You ready?" she asked. Dean smiled. "More than I ever was the first time." They rode the wagon into New Bethesda beneath a bright blue sky. Neighbors waved as they passed, not in pity but in welcome. When the meeting house bell rang, its sound rolled across the prairie like a promise kept. Inside, the sunlight poured through clean windows and pooled across the wooden floor. The bishop stood waiting, his cane beside him, his expression soft. "We gather," he said, "to witness not a beginning, but a completion. A vow once made in fear is renewed today in faith." Dean and Alina faced one another before the congregation. He took her hand openly for the first time, no cloth or coat between them. His voice carried steady. "I once thought holiness meant distance, but God meant love." A murmur moved through the crowd. Many wiped tears from their cheeks. The bishop laid his hand over theirs. "Let this union be a lamp for all who walk through doubt. What God restores, no rule may break." Applause rose, soft but growing. When the blessing ended, the congregation flowed outside into the golden light. Tables stood beneath the cottonwoods, laden with pies, bread, and jars of honey. Clara bustled over, laughing and crying at once. "You two have gone and made half the settlement believe in miracles again." Alina smiled. "The other half will come around once they taste your apple pie." Nearby, Joseph played with the other children by the creek. He waved a small carving in the air, a trio of joined hands. "I made it at school," he called. "It's us." Dean took the carving when Joseph ran to him. "You've got your father's steady hand," he said, voice thick with pride. As dusk fell, neighbors began to leave, lanterns swinging from their wagons. The bishop clasped Dean's shoulder before mounting his horse. "Keep this peace, my friend. It was hard won." Dean nodded. "We intend to." When the last wheels faded down the lane, quiet returned. Fireflies blinked above the tall grass, and a cool wind drifted through the cottonwoods. Dean and Alina sat on the porch together, watching the stars gather. "Do you ever think," Alina said softly, "how a storm brought us together?" Dean smiled at the memory of snow and firelight. "I think on it every night. That storm wasn't wrath. It was grace in disguise." Alina leaned against him. "And what do you reckon grace feels like now?" He laced his fingers with hers. "Like this." They sat hand in hand, listening to Joseph's voice inside, reciting his evening lesson. "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." The prairie night stretched wide before them, filled with the sounds of peace. The rustle of wind, the hum of crickets, the steady beat of two hearts at rest. The storms had ended, the fences mended. What had begun in fear had ended in love. And as starlight spilled over the land, Dean whispered the words he had carried for years, now made true. "We're home. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again." Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.